Hello, Humane Marketers. Sarah Zinacroce here. Welcome to another episode of the Humane Marketing Podcast, a place to be for the generation of marketers who cares. This is the show where we talk about marketing your business in a way that feels good to you, is aligned with your values, and also resonates more with your conscious customers because it's not pushy, ethical, and also beautiful. So if you're a regular here, you know that I'm organizing the conversations around the 7 Ps of humane marketing. And if you're new here and this is your first time, welcome. I'm so excited you're here. You may want to download your one-page marketing plan with the 7 Ps of humane marketing in the form of a mandala at humane.marketing/one page, the number one and page. So again, humane.marketing/one page. And with that, with no further ado, let's dive into today's conversation. Hey, Petchy, so good to hang out with you today.
Hello, Sarah, and likewise. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Wow, yeah. When I looked at, our conversations, me being on your podcast and doing some other things together, all of a sudden I'm like, I'm pretty sure I had Petchy on the podcast already, and then I realized I hadn't. So I'm so glad we get this chance now to talk about branding. I think I did tell you that we're featuring this episode under the P of product of the Humane Marketing podcast or Humane Marketing Mandala. And so, it's this idea of creating a product, and what we kind of discussed before recording is this idea of, well, how does branding fit into us being the product? Maybe a lot of entrepreneurs, that's what it is. We are the product, we are the brand. And so, that's what we want to talk about today. So maybe just kind of, take us right in there. I don't do long introductions. I kind of already introduced you in the intro. So just take us into this concept of branding that, quite honestly, I think you know this and I know it. It's a scary thing sometimes for entrepreneurs, this word branding. It sounds so official. And so, tell us your approach to branding.
Yeah. So when we spoke before this recording session, we were chatting a little bit about, why do you actually need a brand? So maybe that's a good starting point. We can look at that and then go into what a brand is and isn't, and then we'll just take it from there. So the thing with branding is, some people are like, well, do I really need a brand? But the thing is, you already have a brand. And that is whether you like it or not. So the question, I guess, is it a deliberate brand that you're actively taking control of? And that's, I think, where a lot of, especially smaller business owners, go a bit wrong, because they have a misconception in their heads about what a brand actually is. So because a brand, a lot of people tend to think it's just the logo, the colors, and how your visual brand looks.
Right.
But that is really just the tip of the iceberg. And your brand is really, it's what other people think of you. And that's something that you just cannot ever be 100% in control of, because you can't go into people's brains and dictate, this is how you should feel about my brand. So you can't control it fully, but you can try and steer people's views of your brand in the right direction. So a brand is what other people think of you, but branding is what you do to try and influence how people see your brand. And within branding, so branding are the actual activities that you do.
Right.
And that can include a lot of things like positioning, messaging, your brand identity, of course. But your brand identity isn't just the visual either, it's your verbal brand identities. All of those actions that you take to try and influence people's perception of your brand, that is branding.
I love that so much.
Hopefully that cleared up a little bit.
That definition of a brand is what people think of you when you're not there often, right?
Yeah.
And then branding is what you do, which also led me to the question, well, then what's the difference between branding and marketing? Obviously, we know that we overlap on certain things, but what would you say is the difference between branding and marketing?
I would say that branding is more who you are and how people see you, and then, or how you want people to see you. And marketing is more how you tell people about who you are. Like, how do you talk about your products? How do you talk about your brand? And how do you reach those people that you need to reach, your ideal audience? And
Okay, so
those like
let's,
marketing activities, I guess, is like,
yeah,
what do you do to get your brand out there?
right. Okay, so there's the brand, which is again what people think of you. Branding, you said it's doing the thing. So because marketing, you said, is then communicating, right?
Yes.
If that
Yeah.
would be a good word for
Yeah, that's a
communicating
really
about.
good way of putting it.
And so when you say branding is doing, what is the doing? Like,
That can look so different from
mhm,
brand to brand, but it's those, so it's your visual identity, it's how you speak as well, it's how you put yourself out in the world. So I think for smaller business owners, it's really important to remember that your visual branding is actually just a tiny piece of the whole branding puzzle.
yeah,
You also need to, once you've established your brand's foundations and your brand's core, and you know who you are, you know what you stand for, you know your values, you rock solid on that part, then you have to go out and like actively infuse that into every activity that you do for your brand.
right.
So, and that isn't just when you go to do your marketing, but it's also when you, so say, when you recruit people, how you build your company culture, that has to be rooted in your brand's core, but also how you treat people when they come to you with complaints, for instance, on, and like, so your customer service representatives, how should they behave when they act on behalf of your brand?
Right.
Where do you spend your money? You know, when you invest your money or buy services from other brands, are you conscious of where you're putting your money and whether that aligns with your core values?
Mm.
Because if there's a mismatch there, people are going to figure it out, and it's not going to be good for your brand. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. This is so good. And thank you for those examples. I'm currently working with a company for a LinkedIn profile for their executives, and they did send me their branding guidelines, and it's like a document with like 100 pages or so. And so that shows that, they have clear guidelines about their brand. And yes, that includes visuals. But for example, I always ask, what kind of tone do you want your LinkedIn profile to have? And so they have examples of tone in that branding document. So that would be the difference between marketing and, again, branding. Is it's yes, it's doing things, but it's more like guidelines for how you're then going to market. In That's my thinking or my understanding of it.
Yeah, so your brand strategy in a way is what informs every single business action that you take,
Right.
including marketing,
Yeah.
I guess,
Yeah.
because you could put it that way.
That's good. Yeah. We often hear the term also personal branding. So where does that come in, and how is that different from, the branding that we're talking about?
Well, I kind of guess it's in the name. There's a clue in the name. Personal branding is more like how are you putting yourself out into the world, and how are you being conscious about how you want other people to see you. But what I find is that with smaller businesses, smaller brands, where there is one person who is the main character of the brand, I guess, or product of the brand, as you said earlier, I find that the lines get really blurry
Mm-hmm.
between like the personal brand and the actual brand. And to a certain extent, I think that's how it has to be for the smaller brands, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's true. Because at least for my humane marketing, I always say bring more of you to your marketing, because what I'm mainly talking to, who I mainly talk to, is entrepreneurs. But I even feel like the bigger brands, we do have this trend of wanting to make it more personal. So I would say personal branding somehow even applies to bigger brands. It's just that it's probably going to be more worldview and value oriented than specific to just one person, right?
Yeah, I would say that. I don't think that as a solo business owner or a small business owner that you can remove yourself 100% from your brand. Because with the smaller brands, you can't rely as heavily on sheer size, or your market share or your reputation. So that personal connection, that human to human connection becomes more important, really, because you want to build trust. And that trust is much, much easier to gain for a smaller brand if there's a personal connection, human to human. So I guess that's a strong argument in itself. Whereas like a big household brand that everybody knows about, they probably don't need that same level of human to human connection in the big scale of things. But on a more personal level, the human to human connection becomes important. And that's when it's really important that, so if you are a small brand now and then you have big plans and you grow and then you're becoming a bigger brand, that human to human connection will trickle down into your employee level rather than yourself. Right. And that's when it's important that your employees are on board with the brand values and the brand approach and like the brand personality, so that they can act on behalf of your brand and create those connections for your brand.
And that's not easy. That's not an easy job, especially if you have like a huge brand. Every store clerk and everybody needs to be informed about those values. And
that's where it can fall apart if you aren't clear on those foundations right from day one. Because if you're not clear on them yourself, and then as your team grows, it's going to get more and more difficult to communicate that to your team so that they can take that and act on it. So I would say even that's why it's so important, even for the smaller businesses, to have a think about these things, even if it's still just the early days, or even if it's still just you.
Quotation marks for those who are not watching the video. What it makes me think also of is if you are just a one person brand, a lot of the first things you need to decide is on the name of your business and on your domain name that you're going to reserve, your website. And so there's always this question, well, do I use my name as my brand or as my website domain, or do I use a name for my business and then use that as a domain name? So kind of like, what are the pros and cons of using your name or not using your name?
Well, again, this is very individual. So I guess my first thing that I want to say is you don't have to do anything if it doesn't feel right for you. So it's not like you have to use your name to build a brand centered around you as a person. And it totally depends on your circumstances. For some people, it really makes sense to use their name, and they want to use their name. They're comfortable using their name and putting it out there. Maybe they know that, okay, I want this business to be centered around me. Maybe it's not even going to grow. And that in that case, it just really makes sense to use your name as a brand name and build on that personal brand. But there are businesses who are run by just one person who also can absolutely have a very different brand name.
Right.
So I think it's a very personal decision to make. And it depends a little bit on what is it that you're putting out there. So for a coach, for instance, or someone who works with a very sort of tight, closed personal connection with their clients, it maybe makes a lot more sense to be using your name. Whereas if you're selling a product, or if you're selling
or a program,
a program or one-to-many service, then it makes more sense to have a brand name that's separate from your own name.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that you have to remove yourself completely from your brand. So I guess what I'm saying is it kind of gets down to brand architecture and how you want to build the layers of your brand as the founder.
We'll get to that term in a minute because I think there's more to unpack under the term brand architecture. Now we're getting like super into it.
Now we're going to get geeky.
Exactly, super geeky. Yeah, what came up for me also is, kind of my evolution of brand. So I have my website, Saracen and Croce. That's where I built my LinkedIn consulting brand over the last decade or so. And so that was, very clear to me. This is me as the LinkedIn consultant. And I never, obviously you can't use LinkedIn in the brand. So that was already kind of a limitation, I guess. And that, needs to be taken into consideration. You can't just make up a brand name using, existing terms and names. And then I started thinking about the gentle business revolution and gentle marketing and the story behind that trademark mess. And so that's kind of another thing that I guess if you go with a brand name, then you're really, and I did not realize that. I just went, very naively into that thing. But you do get into other territories where all of a sudden it's not just your name anymore. You're claiming a brand name. And, the story that happened to me, I published a book 2 weeks after I got a cease and desist letter that I cannot use that name, Gentle Marketing, anymore. So in a way, it does feel like there's more considerations to think of when you are using, words and make up your own brand name rather than just using because nobody can kind of cease and desist your name. That's your name. You own it.
Nobody can go after you for using your name. So there's safety in that, of course, as well.
Yeah.
But I guess if you're a person who isn't super keen on being the face of your brand, then one way to do that is to focus your efforts more on like branding your products or your services, or maybe your signature method, finding like a brand name for those, and then still remaining in the background or the foreground, however much you're comfortable with, as the creator of. So for instance, I have a framework that I've spent probably 20 something years developing, and I call it the Brand It framework. And I then can say that I'm the creator of that framework.
Right. Yeah.
So if that at some point, if that grows bigger than me, I don't know if it will. I don't have any fixed plans for that. But if it does, if it blows up and it gets bigger than me, then I can still say that I'm the creator of that framework.
Yeah.
So I would then possibly lead with my framework rather than leading with my name.
Exactly. You would take a new domain
what's
name.
right. Yeah. What's right and what's wrong is very individual.
Yeah.
And it's a personal choice.
It's personal choice. And it comes back to your definition of success. And yet it's not an easy choice, because so often we hear either one or the other being the right decision, right? Oh, you got to scale and go big, and you want to exit, your business at one point, and that's why you need a brand. Or on the other hand is, no, you want that personal connection, and that's why you need to use your name as your brand. Well, it depends, you need to actually think about how you see this business. Do you want to grow it? And if you don't, well, you're perfectly fine using your name. And for me,
and even if you do, you can still use your name.
Exactly.
You see, I mean, like, you see big brand names based off a real person's name all the time, where you know that they are this huge brand with lots of employees, worldwide presence, and it's still that person's name at the top.
There's no correct answer, really.
No, and I think that's one of my pet peeves in the business world, is this whole notion that my way is the right way, and then you have 3 or 4 different people claiming that it's their way, that it's the only way.
Right.
And really, there is no right or wrong answer. It's only down to you what path you like to take. And you can course correct along the way. So if you start out using your own name, for instance, and you feel like that's not it's not quite right, then you can twist it and you can take a different turn.
Yeah. What I noticed, though, Petchy, is it's easier for people to be told this is the right way, right? They're like, oh, this is the easy answer that I'm looking for. And so when we tell them, oh, it's up to you, you have the choice, then they're like, oh, I don't know. And then so really what we're saying here is like, if you feel like you don't know which way to go, well, sit with it and actually do the work and figure out, well, what do I want to do with this business? Do I want to grow it? What's my definition of success? All of these questions that take some deeper work, because the gurus, they will tell you it's only this way or it's only that way.
And of course it's easy. I mean, I like the idea of just being able to take someone else's approach and make it work for me out of the box. But I think in reality that works for very few people. And I see it all the time when I work with my clients and the work that I do with my clients. I will never design just a logo for a client, for instance, and that's because I need them to do that deep inner work first, so I can do a good job. And the resistance there to actually go and do that deep work is present in 90-something% of all of my clients. When they come to me and they're like, oh, I just need a logo, I just want it to look good, and do I really need to look into these deep questions? It's hard. And I'm like, well, you really do need to, and that's why the process takes longer than just like a couple of weeks to complete as well, because these are really big, really heavy questions, and they take time to process.
I really feel like we do the same groundwork, because it's the same with the clients who just want marketing. They just want clients. And so it's like, okay, just tell me how I need to market, right? Do I need to be on Facebook, on Instagram? Like, no, you need to actually go into these deep questions. And I feel like that's what we have in common. You then go into branding and I go into marketing, but the deep core level, figuring out, who you are and what you want, that needs to come first in both cases.
It does. And what I will say also is, after that initial period of resistance and feeling like, oh, it's too hard, it's too big, I can't do this, once they start to like find the little golden nuggets within themselves that they already had, like all of this is already inside you. You just need to extract them. And sometimes you just need someone to help you, like sort your thoughts around things. But really, nobody else but you can do the actual work of doing that inner work. And then what I find is, when people start to find those golden nuggets within themselves and they have those aha moments, they emerge on the other side of that really quite what feels like a bit of a rocky road to them, I think. And they emerge with such clarity that it's amazing to see the transformation in how they then talk about their brand or talk about themselves as a brand
differently
afterwards.
It's kind of like the labyrinths I talk about in the Marketing Like We're Human book. You go in, you rumble, you have to ask all these deep questions. Then you stand in the middle of the labyrinth, you rise, you realize how you are different from everybody else. And then you walk back into the world and you resonate, right? Because you are now clear and you can tell these stories that just resonate with people. And that's what the branding does, that deep foundational branding, not the logo. The logo doesn't do that, right? Because there's not enough deep inner work. That's amazing. I want to kind of come to some other questions as well. Well, that term that you mentioned before, brand architecture. So tell us a bit more about that and the different layers of branding.
I'll try and make it, simplify it a bit, because brand architecture can be really complex, but we can also think about it in really sort of simpler terms. So in essence, brand architecture, it's the layers of your brand. So how many levels does your brand have? And on the one side, you have what we call a branded house. And on the other extreme, you have what you call a house of brands. And then, of course, there are all sorts of hybrid models that you can adopt in the middle there. And a lot of us smaller business owners will probably find ourselves leaning towards a hybrid model, or maybe a branded house. So somewhere towards that end of the scale. And that's because we are naturally we are naturally the focus of our brands, but we then might have certain product brands that then lie on the next level below us. Like, so if you place yourself as the mother brand of your brand, Sarah is on the top there. Mm-hmm. And then you have your method, that's kind of a sub brand to your main brand, and any other like products or services that you decide to brand separately. So it's brand architecture is more about figuring out how all of these little puzzle pieces fit together. And then you can also look at whether you want that. Do you want there to be a difference between your personal brand and your corporate brand? Because, and that goes back to what we were just talking about as well. And it's really is up to you how visible you are as the brand owner. So if you're leaning more towards a corporate brand, then you would perhaps not use your own name so much. But if you're leaning more towards a personal brand, you would lead with your name. So,
or in the corporate brand, just be featured as like the founder, or
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, you have examples of this. So you have some of the big household brands where you have Unilever, for instance. They obviously, that's the mother brand, but it's not really that visible when you go out and look into the world. You don't really see the mother brand as much because you see the sub brands, you see the product brands.
Right.
They are the ones who take center stage. And the reason why a lot of these like bigger brands that have a lot of different products do it that way is because it then allows them to go into the marketplace and compete against itself, if you know what I mean. They can have several different products, very distinct product brands. So, and they can be competing against each other.
But so that would be the house of brands, right? That would be the corporate model.
That's more of the corporate line. So, for instance, if you have a very strong but hidden mother brand, maybe they do lines of cleaning products. Maybe they even do like 2 different brands of washing powder, like detergent. Because they are structured in that way, they can do that. Like they can put the brands up to like against each other. But that's not the approach that most small business owners take. So we're more on the other end of the scale where we just focus on building a solid core around ourselves. And then you can decide whether you want to have a prominent role in that or whether you want to step back a little bit and let your approach or your signature service, if you want those to lead instead. So it's just figuring out like the prominence of the different levels as well and how it all works together. But I don't know if I mentioned it too, but I do have a little guide on this, just a 1-page PDF that I will happily let your listeners have. So I will send that to you.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, Sarah. We'll definitely make sure that they can download that, because I think that's when it gets complex, as well as, you know, we were talking before we recorded this idea of what if you have outgrown your brand and now you need to rebrand, and, you know, all these questions. Well, what do I need to change? How do I communicate about it? That's when it gets complex, and that's when people really need to ask for help from someone like you, because then it can quickly get into very messy brands, right? Where it's like,
I see it all the time.
Sometimes it's like that, one times it's like that, and it just kind of gets confusing.
It's one of the scenarios that I come across the most actually when I work with my clients. Is so they will come to me, they already have a brand and they're doing fairly well with that, but it feels like something's a little bit off. It's not feeling aligned anymore. And then maybe they feel like they've outgrown their brand, as you said. And I think that's when it becomes even more important to take that step back and look at the foundations before you do anything else, because maybe that was the missing piece from the previous brand. And a lot of the time, I find that they don't have to throw everything out of the window and start all over. A lot of the time, we can take what they have and we can mold it and we can tweak it and we can turn that into the next iteration of the brand. So it's not always necessary to go right back. Start from scratch.
I have a very personal question about my brand. You know, I have the Humane Marketing. That's kind of it's more of a an idea as a brand, because my company is not called Humane Marketing. The website is Humane Marketing. And then I have Marketing Like We're Human, Selling Like We're Human. Those are the books. So would you say Marketing Like We're Human and Selling Like We're Human are kind of like these sub brands, even though I'm not really branding them, but I'm often talking about this idea of selling or marketing, or now LinkedIn Like We're Human? Is this kind of a sub brand, even though I'm not really branding it per se?
Yeah, I think it's kind of just naturally falling into the category of sub-brand.
Okay.
Maybe you're just doing it subconsciously, but and it feels like natural. But also, I feel like your whole approach, the whole sort of human-centered way of doing things, has potential to become a brand of its own, something bigger than you eventually. Like
Yeah.
if that is the direction that you wanted to take it.
That's so Humane Marketing, that's kind of the reason why I, didn't put it under my name. I was like, well, if I'm wanting to create a movement, then it's not all about me. It's about the movement and the idea behind the movement. And so that's why I went with Humane Marketing and the trademark and all of that. So yeah, I was just wondering, what is a sub brand in a small business example? So for you, branded, you said, that could become its own sub brand eventually. So I'm thinking maybe Marketing Like We're Human is another example.
Yeah, I would say that's exactly how it would work. And then for now, maybe you are more prominent than Humane Marketing, but at
Yeah.
some point you might find that the roles change, and that's okay. And you can then make a conscious decision of whether you want to lead with yourself or whether you want to lead with your approach or your method or your
Right.
movement. But also, it kind of gives you a lot of cred too. If this thing grows bigger than you, if you manage to create this worldwide movement, then imagine what effect that has on your personal brand, to be able to go out there and say with confidence and pride that, hi, I'm Sarah, I'm the creator of this movement, I'm the founder of this. So they're all connected.
Yeah. 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 I see how the personal brand plays into that now. Yeah. There's one kind of final topic I wanted to touch upon, and that's this idea of the future. What does the future of branding looks like? Which direction are we going in terms of branding?
Oh, well, I don't think I have a crystal ball, but the way I see it and the way I'm experiencing it as a part of like the business world right now is that those personal connections are going to become even more important for brands as we move forward, because people are craving that human connection. People are craving to be seen, to be heard, to be taken seriously by a human, and to not just feel like they're a number in a sales spreadsheet or
Yeah.
in a CRM system. I know for myself that makes me feel it feels like it's dehumanizing somehow. So
Yeah.
those genuine connections, and not trying to present yourself as anything other than what you are, not trying to con people, just don't be an asshole. Sorry, am I allowed to swear on your
Yeah,
podcast?
that's fine. Totally fine. Yeah, and it's funny because just yesterday I got on a call with a new circle member, a Humane Marketing Circle, and I offer these coffee chats. And the guy actually said, I really appreciate having this chat with you. I was really impressed by this human connection, because usually in these memberships we don't get that. And that proves what you just said. It's like, yeah, we're used to just being a number, right? We're used to kind of just paying monthly subscriptions, but not actually counting as human beings, or not having that connection with the other people or the founders. So I think you're totally right. What about in
I think
terms
we're
of, go ahead.
No, sorry, I was just saying, I think we're moving from the sort of spray and pray approach to a more focused, deeper but narrower kind of connection.
Yeah. Yeah. Which also maybe means smaller businesses, not giant, kingdoms of businesses like some of the big names had in the past, smaller communities, but very meaningful communities. I think that's where we're heading.
Yeah, I think there will still we will still see those big brands as well, because they are so established by now that they just own a certain
Right.
market share by now. But when you see a lot of smaller brands emerging, it's a lot easier for people to find a brand that really resonates with them, that they really feel on board with this brand's vision and what they're trying to do and the values and what they stand for. And that connection of feeling like you are a part of something and
Yeah.
not just an invisible, insignificant little puzzle piece.
Mhm.
I think that becomes more important for people, because people want to feel like they're making a difference or that they're doing good,
Right.
and whatever that might be. So, I mean, I will find a lot of brands out there that stand for the complete opposite of what I stand for, but there will be people who resonate with them too.
Yeah.
And then I can go and find the brand that resonates with me. And then that's my way of being able to influence the world in a direction I want to see it, is choosing what brands I support and what brands I buy from.
Right. What about visually? I remember you and I talked about the visual aspect also of future design. What's your future vision there?
This is a big question as well. There's this term that I've seen going around the block lately, and it's debranding. And it's where I see, okay, so that some of the like bigger, more established brands have ditched slightly complex logos and gone back to basics with just the sort of flat logos, very simple like logo types. And I've seen some like controversy around it as well. And like people are like, oh, what do you think of this before and after? And you have a lot of designers, especially the younger designers, going, oh, why are they doing that? Now they don't look like, they are not distinct anymore. They just look like one of many. And for me, I'm classically trained. I'm a bit of a dinosaur. I'm going to age myself now for saying this, but I'm trained the old school way to develop visual identities. And especially if we talk about the logo, that it should be able to work in its simplest form.
Right.
And then, so that was the initial approach. And then like maybe in the old days, you didn't have all of the digital channels that we have now and all of the different reproduction methods for like digital print and all of that. And so your logo had to be simple. It had to communicate in a really simple way and be really distinct, just in one color and just flat. So that's where like I come from. And then you can add things to it. And I think with technology just moving so fast, we were able to do so many things to these logos so easily. We could just like add a drop shadow, or we could add a gradient, or we could make it look fancy, or we could animate logos. And somewhere in that, I think we lost the simplicity that's really powerful, because we just started adding things because we could.
Right.
And the way I see it now is more brands are returning to the basics, because even though we have now all of these options of how to place our logo, and really we aren't limited to anything, but it's just going back to the basics. And
seems
then
to be a movement
it
kind of everywhere, right? And it's bad to me. It's going in the right direction, and we need to simplify everywhere.
Yeah, and that's not to say that you can't start with a simple logo and add something fancy to it, but it's just then you will always have that really solid, recognizable icon that you can go back to. So okay, so all of these special effects, they're all just fashion.
Right.
They're all just like trends, fleeting trends. So maybe one year gradient logos are all the rage. Everybody wants a gradient logo, and they're like a year after, that trend is gone. And it's nice then to have just a clean, timeless logo that you can revert back to and then tweak it.
I'm just also thinking, about, I don't know, printing, for example. Like every time you print such a complicated logo, well, you use more ink, right? And so just sustainably thinking also, it needs to go into the direction of simplifying and going back to basics. And yeah, to me, that seems the right direction anyway. I think we kind of got lost, just like, yeah, everywhere else. We got lost with technology and robots and chatbots and all of that. And now we just need to come back to basics and
But it's no wonder I'm an early adopter of all like kinds of technology. I love new technology. I love new gadgets. So I get that it's fun to play with,
right,
but I don't think we should lose the sight of the basics and
right.
where we came from either. So
Mm.
striking a balance there, I think,
It's good.
is the
Yeah.
future of branding, finding that sweet spot and what works for you.
Mm.
Yeah. So not necessarily looking to a different brand or other brands, like bigger brands, to figure out what's right for you. Don't just copy, just have that sort of introspective look at
Wonderful.
things.
This has been really great. Thanks so much, Petchy, for having this conversation and sharing so much wisdom. I always
Thank you for
ask,
inviting me.
yeah, thank you. I always ask one last question before you share where people can find you, but what are you grateful for today or this week?
Today, well, not just today and not just this week, but just this year or this decade. I'm just really grateful for living in a very safe country. I have food, I have clothes, I have a roof over my head, a wonderful family. And that's something to be grateful for, I think, in these times where we see what's happening around the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Happy for you. Thank you. Share with us where people can find you and mention maybe that PDF. Do you want to just send me that, or is there a link that I can
Yeah,
share
I
with
can send you that afterwards and you can
you? Okay.
put it wherever you
Yeah.
so wish. Yeah, no, the best place to go and find me and learn more about me online is my website. You'll find everything there, from like my approach and what I'm all about and ways to work with me and how to find me in other channels, and that's petchy.co. I also hang out on Instagram quite a lot and on LinkedIn, but you won't probably see me pop up in your feed because the action is all in the sort of DMs and that. But it's petchy.co on Instagram as well, if you want to follow along there. And like I said, my feed is a static evergreen 9 grid. So the best way to connect with me on there is just to slide into my DMs and say hello.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. This was amazing. I learned a lot. So thank you for that, Petchy. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for watching and being part of a generation of marketers who cares for yourself, for your clients, and for the planet. We really are change makers before we are marketers. So go ahead, be the change you want to see in the world. And I hope to see you again next week. Take care.